Good morning. We'll begin our class this morning. Are there any prayer requests? Okay. Ken Reed's going in for some surgery this Thursday, so we want to remember Ken. Wednesday, I'm sorry. Right. And if anybody hasn't seen the email about Lene, she's had a detached retina in one eye, so she's only been able to see out of the other eye. And her good eye, the doctor's now saying that has a detached retina. So they're trying to figure out when they're going to schedule surgery for that to hopefully get her eyesight back. Wednesday it's going to happen. So Lene's surgery is Wednesday and Ken Reed's surgery is Wednesday. So let's remember both of those. Just some type of surgery. I'm not sure what it is. Do we know, Tom? It's just surgery. Just surgery. Anything else? Will you bow with me, please? Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this morning you've given us. We're thankful for the rain that's coming down to water things and give life to your nature here, Father. Father, we're mindful of our family and friends who are struggling with illnesses. We're mindful of Ken and Lene who are having surgeries this Wednesday. Be with them, Father. Be with the doctors and nurses that are administering the care to them. Guide their hands that the surgeries will be successful and that their health will be restored. Be with the rest of our members who are struggling with cancers and other illnesses, Father. We ask that you extend your healing hand and restore their health. In Jesus' name, amen. Still in the book of Daniel, which will probably be here another few weeks. We are winding down chapter 11, and chapter 12 is much shorter, but there's a lot more to chapter 12, so I'm a little hesitant to get there, but I know we're going to have to get there. And there's some things I still don't understand about chapter 12, but we'll get through it when we get there. Any questions what we've gone through chapter 11 already? And I know some of you folks that might be visiting with us, Daniel is quite an intense book. A lot of people think it's just about the fiery furnace and the lion's den, but you know, chapters 10 and 11, and when we get into 12 is prophecy. And we're looking at this story of what's being told to Daniel from an angel. In Daniel's eyes, it's all prophetic. In our eyes, as we're reading it, it's all history. So we're able to get a little more insight into it because we have the history to support these prophecies that have come true. But in Daniel's eyes, he's being told certain things that's going to happen 300-400 years after he's gone. So, so Daniel might not be understanding everything that's going to be happening at this point. And it'd be awful hard for him, too, because not names, but kingdoms are being talked about that don't even exist yet. Terry, you had your hand up.
Are you done with 11 now?
No.
Okay, go on.
No, we're at partway through verse 36. I started verse 36 last week.
Okay, that's fine. You haven't gotten to my question yet.
I'm sure it's down here, the way you are. No, we're at verse 36, and I was going to bring my notes for chapter 12. I'm thinking, there's no way I'm getting through 10 verses. Sorry. But we just started verse 36 last week, Terry. We're not to your question. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, everybody be ready for Terry to raise that hand because we know it's coming. Okay. But we're good with so much of what we talked about verses 35 and previous. And like I said, we just started verse 36, and I just started talking about who the king was, and I basically determined in my eyes of what's going on here that it's still talking about Antiochus. It's not talking about the Antichrist. It's not talking about the Roman Empire. It's still a continuation of the previous verses of when in verse 36 it says, then the king will do as he pleases. That is still talking about Antiochus IV of what he's doing to the Jewish people. I'm going to read verse 36 again, then we'll continue on. Then the king will do as he pleases and will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. And we know how Antiochus is and some of the things, the horrific things he's done to the Jewish people, how he's battled the king of the south down in Egypt and all those wars that he's gone through. And here it's talked about that the king, Antiochus, is going to do as he pleases. He's been doing that all along. We know that when he came through Jerusalem, it's prophecy for Daniel, but we're looking back at history. When he came through Jerusalem, how he raided the temple, he took all the gold and he desecrated the temple by building an altar and offering swine on it. So we know some of the things that he has done, and it's no different here than still the explanation that the angel is given to Daniel, that he's going to continue to do as he pleases. And it's not just desecrating the temple, it's trying to eradicate the Jewish faith and kill some of the Jewish people as well. And this phrase here, the king will do as he pleases, is very similar to the language that was done back earlier in Daniel about the Medes and Persians and the Greeks in chapter 8, verse 4. We'll take a look at that. And this is where it says, no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue him from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnify himself. This was Daniel's visions about the four beasts, and there was one that was above all the others, and he really couldn't, the angel didn't describe it as a particular beast as the other ones were. And this is referring to, back in chapter 8, was referring back to Antiochus IV. And the same verbiage here is used in chapter 11. It was used in chapter 4. And also earlier in chapter 11, verse 3. And a mighty king, referring to Antiochus, will arise and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. Multiple times here in the book of Daniel, not just in chapter 11, it's saying this powerful king's going to rise and he's going to do whatever he wants. And history has proven that that's exactly what Antiochus did. He was that type of king that would do that. Even earlier in chapter 4, when it was Nebuchadnezzar was king, he's kind of like Antiochus. When he got into power, it was basically, I did this. This is a result of my actions, my doings, my power. This is all on me. Antiochus is the same way. He got into this position thinking, I did all this. I conquered all these things. And we know God has his hand in everything. These folks thought they were the master of their own destiny, that they were infallible. But as we're going to see later on, and has already been prophesied here in the book of Daniel, that Antiochus' terror and his reign is going to come to an end. So Antiochus is not a master of his own destiny, because if that's the case, he would be powerful throughout and he would have a wonderful life and he would live forever. That's not going to be the case. His terror on the Jewish people is going to come to an end, and his own life is going to come to an end. So just like Nebuchadnezzar, we know how he died. Antiochus is going to be somewhat the same way. It's his own demise that he's happening. He's saying, look at how good I am, but in turn, you're nothing without God. And that's going to be the demise of Antiochus himself. And as he's doing these things, Antiochus, I keep bringing his name up because this is who chapter 11 is about. That he's a powerful king, he's doing all these things, but as verse 36 describes, and as he's doing this, he will exalt and magnify himself above every other god. So his arrogance is saying, I'm above these gods. Not just the God of heaven, because he really didn't believe in him. He knew he was there. He knew the Jewish people and the covenant that they had with God, but he never worshiped him. He never had his faith in him. But this is referring to that he will exalt and magnify himself above every god. It's all the Greek gods, all the idols that were out there. That's what this is talking about. He's saying, these other gods that my forefathers sacrificed to, that I worship, I'm better than they are. I'm putting myself above these gods that I'm making sacrifices to, that I'm giving tribute to, that I'm giving all this gold and silver to. That's what he is doing. He's putting himself above the gods that he even worships. And he was such an arrogant person that when he had his coins minted, he had the phrase put on there, God manifest. This coin right here is not just a representation. It is a true coin that has been found. And on the left side of the screen, written vertically, there's two little words there. I don't know how you pronounce it at the top, but that's what is written on the left side of the coin. And that says God manifest on his own coin. It's hard to read, but if you see it, the shins, you see the E-O-Y written there, then the word underneath is, I can't read Greek, I don't know how you pronounce that. But when it's interpreted, it's God manifest. This is a true coin that somebody owns in their collection today. And that's the coins that he has. And what's even more amazing, there's multiple coins out there from this time period and before. And as looking for some representation as I come across this, I come across this website that on December 2nd, if you want to own a coin from Antiochus, there's multiple coins being auctioned off on December 2nd of true coins that have been found that exist today. And so if you've got the prices right, you can own your own Antiochus IV coin. So if you buy one, bring it. I'd love to see it because I ain't going to bid on it. But it's neat that history from way back then, Antiochus ended roughly at 160 BC. So we're looking at, what, 2,100, 2,200 years ago? These coins were minted. These coins have existed for over 2,000 years, and they're still in existence today. Again, proving history that Antiochus did exist, and some of the things that we're reading about here in Daniel that are saying this king's going to put himself above gods and all this, this is more historical proof that that happened. The history is there proving the prophecy that was done in Daniel. Simply by a little coin here by him putting himself above God, that verbiage there meaning God manifest. And it's Antiochus did this referring to himself. That's the type of king he was. It's all about me, me, me. And that's more proof that some of the things that Antiochus did. And doing that, so he's putting himself above God. He's speaking bad things about the God of heaven, desecrating the temple as we're continuing on in verse 36. And he had the most animosity against God because of the relationship he had with the Jewish people. The relationship that the Jewish people and God had with each other, the covenant that was there, and that's what he was trying to break. Remember, he was trying to eliminate the Jewish religion. And here, in verse 36, he's speaking monstrous things about God. He's trying to eliminate the Jewish religion. And by speaking bad things about God, along with not just saying things, but doing things. Desecrating the temple was one of the worst things he could do to the Jewish people, was desecrating the temple, because that was, the backbone of their faith, of giving the offerings all the time. And he took that away from them. And along with this, as a good leader would do, like Antiochus, he was prospering. He was getting rich. He himself was the one collecting all the gold and riches when he was looting places. And at the end of verse 36, it says, he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. Antiochus continued to grow and grow in power and fortune up until he died. And at the end here, in verse 36, it talks about the term indignation. It's a Hebrew word, and it means anger or annoyance provoked by what is perceived as unfair treatment. So I could see how the Jewish people could take it that way. As Daniel is being told by the angel here, that Antiochus is going to prosper until the indignation, until this anger or annoyance that is being provoked on the Jewish people is done with. And that's what it's talking about here. And the term indignation is used elsewhere in the book of Daniel, about the ram and the goat. Daniel 8:19, he said, behold, I'm going to let you all know what will occur at the final period of time. The final period of time is not the second coming of Christ. We've talked about that multiple times. It's about what's going to happen at the end of this time period that the Jewish people are suffering. And at the time of the indignation, it's the end of the Jewish suffering under Antiochus, for pertaining to the appointed time of the end. All referring back to the Jewish people, you've been in captivity, you're being punished. At some point, this is going to end. And in the vision that Daniel's having here in chapter 11, the angel is telling Daniel, this is going to end. This suffering, this punishment that the Jewish people are having is going to come to an end. And the man doing all these things to you, the Antiochus, his reign, his terror is going to come to an end as well. So the suffering of the Jewish people is going to end, and the reign of Antiochus himself will end, and he is eventually going to die. A lot there in verse 36. Any questions on this? When we talk about a lot of different things, and remember, chapter 11 is all about Antiochus right here, of what he's going to be doing, some of the things he's done. And sometimes the chapter goes forward with it. Then when you get later onto it, it backs up a little bit and starts talking about some of the same things that he did. And it's kind of hard to follow at times, but I hope I'm getting it across that it's just not a continuation story of Antiochus. It gives a little bit, then it goes back and tells a little bit more of what Antiochus himself had done. Verse 37, the king's not going to show any regard for the gods of his fathers. This is referring to Antiochus, his forefathers, his brothers, and then all the gods and idols that they worshiped. He's not going to be worshiping the same ones. He's not going to ignore them, but they're not going to be his prized and favorite god that he worshiped. I mean, you think about back in the day, like there's all these traditions. We even have traditions today in families and things like that, where the passing down of cultures is specifically back in their time. It was tradition for certain things to be passed down, to worship certain gods, that you worship the God of your father and your forefather. You worship these idols. Antiochus ignored all that. He went on his own way. He didn't worship the gods that they particularly did. He started worshiping his own gods that were there. Back in his time, the main god that they worshiped was Apollo. He's not the only one, don't get me wrong. He's not the only one. They worship hundreds of idols. They worship hundreds of gods. But the main one under the Syrian Empire was Apollo. Antiochus didn't have him as his main god. His main god was Zeus. And Zeus is the god that Antiochus built the altar and the temple for, that he made the sacrifices to. So Antiochus is saying, I'm kind of ignoring the traditions of my fathers and my forefathers about Apollo being the main god that I worship and made sacrifices to. I'm going on my own, and I'm worshiping this other one. And we'll talk about Zeus in a little bit later. It's either in this verse or in, I think, verse 38, I get a little bit more to him. But that's who Antiochus is, his main honor is given to, is the god of Zeus. And that's talking about here in verse 37, he's going to give no regard to what his forefathers did. And then it goes on, for the desire of women. It's not that Antiochus was desiring and lusting after women. It's talking about the gods that the women's worship. And this is referring to the god Adonis. And this was the god of beauty, of desire, and rebirth. And it was the Babylonian fertility god. And this god was, of course, popular among women. And Adonis was known to everybody throughout that, to the Egyptians, to the Babylonians, to the Syrians, even to the Jewish people. Adonis to the Egyptian was known as Osiris, and he was greatly honored also by the whole Ptolemy Empire, which was the king of the south. Adonis was known to the Jews as Tammuz, and Tammuz is brought up once in the Bible that I found in Ezekiel chapter 8, verses 14, and the women were weeping for Tammuz because he was supposedly dying. Read Ezekiel 8. It also talks about the abomination of Jerusalem, and it ties in very nicely with what's going on with chapter 10 and 11 here in the book of Daniel. And as we continue on, he's showing for no other God. And as I mentioned about Ezekiel 8, I'll go back to that one. Ezekiel 8, if you read further on about Tammuz, about the Jewish women weeping for him, verse 15 continues on. He said to me, do you see this, son of man? You will see still greater abominations than these. Even in Ezekiel, it's talking about worse things happening to the Jewish people than what they've seen so far. Same thing that's happening here in the book of Daniel. Worse things are coming, but it's going to come to an end. As we talked about Antiochus all the way through chapter 10 and chapter 11, things were bad, but they progressively got worse and worse and worse under Antiochus. Stretching? While Antiochus didn't necessarily reject all these other gods, he did show preference to, as I said, to Zeus, and he did show regard for these gods. He did offer some sacrifices to him as out of the little bit of respect that he would have for these other gods, but his main one was Zeus, and he's the one that he'd offer gold to, silver to. And still, even though he respected and honored Zeus, he still put himself above Zeus. He still thought he was better than these gods that he worshiped. He still thought he was more powerful and had more prestige than the gods that he worshiped. That's the type of man that we're dealing with here in Antiochus. And we see verses 36 through 39 is still all talking about Antiochus, his arrogance, and how he feels about himself, how he puts himself above the people, how he puts himself above God's. And verse 38 continues on with the same thing. But instead, Antiochus will honor the God of a fortress, a God whom his fathers didn't know. Zeus had been around for a long time. As much as I read, early records are showing up of Zeus as far as 700 BC. But I don't know if I trust that, because as I was reading that, it was also saying in this multiple commentaries and places where Zeus existed at 700 BC, it was saying before the exist of mankind. Well, that don't make sense. If he existed before mankind, how do we have record of him existing? And we know that man existed before 700 BC. So I don't know if I really trust those commentators saying that Zeus existed, the first writings of him existed around 700 BC, when right after that they're saying that, well, that was before man existed. So when Zeus really existed and that people worshipped, took him as a god, I really don't know. But he was there before his forefathers, but yet they didn't worship him. Even though the gods existed, they didn't worship him like they did Apollo. That's what we're referring to here in verse 38, a God whom his fathers did not know. They knew of him. They did not worship him like the god Apollo and all the other gods that they did worship. Whereas Antiochus was the one that was worshiping Zeus. And Zeus, excuse me, you can see him on whatever shows that he's brought up in, that he's typically known as the god of thunder. Zeus is also known as the god of the sky. He's known as the god of thunder. He's known as the god of law and the god of order. And this was the god that in Jerusalem that Antiochus gave honor to. Antiochus also renamed the temple in Jerusalem. This is the Lord's temple. He renamed it after Zeus. So what do you think that did to the Jewish people? That still cut them to the quick. He took over the temple. He looted of it gold and silver. He built an altar to Zeus. He offered swine on that altar. Now he's renaming that temple. He's renaming the Lord's temple after Zeus, this god, this heathen god that he's worshiping. So Antiochus is doing these things for his own benefit that he believes. He's doing it for his own prestige and power, but yet it's cutting to the quick the Jewish people of what was done to the temple and also the renaming of it. Along with this is all talking about the god of the fortress, referring back to the temple area, but referring to Zeus being the god of order, god of thunder, the god of power, and things like that. Antiochus also built a fortress for his Syrian soldiers adjoining to the temple. So now the temple has this barracks, if you will, attached to it where the Syrian soldiers are living. And remember, the Syrian soldiers went in and desecrated the temple as well, because they went in, just regular unclean men went into this temple when it was meant for the high priest. So this shows more disregard by Antiochus to the Jewish people and their faith. And it shows a willingness that Antiochus had to idolize strength and idolize dominance by offering and putting Zeus as his primary god that he worshiped, the god of thunder, the god of law, the god of order. It's all showing that Antiochus was willing to have and idolize somebody that represented strength, power, and dominance. And that is who Antiochus was. And we see it in everything that he did. Any questions about the gods that we just talked about there? Zeus in particular, or anything like that, or what happened to the temple, or anything that Antiochus has been doing? We all up to date? If I give you a quiz, you know what will happen? Yeah. The shoulders? Soldiers? Yes.
And they didn't die when they went in the most holy place?
No record that I found of they did. The whole temple was looted. Not at this time. Prior when they went in and when he desecrated the temple, they went through the whole temple. And nothing was said about any soldiers dying that I have read. Jason? I mean,
It's his choice.
I mean, they could go in and die. They could go in and not die, as it was prophesied. I don't know. But there was nothing that I read that anybody that went into the holy place, the most holy place, died because of going in there. Nothing I read on that. I think yours was first, then Terry.
I even thinking about that earlier, because the one, I forget what the guy's name was, but, Antioch told the one to take the treasure, you remember he went in?
Yes.
He was punished in some way or whatever, and he went back and said, I'm not going in there again, because, I didn't survive being out of life.
I don't know if he went into the holy place, most holy, because it was the people that stopped him and beat him, and I can't remember his name. It started with an H. But it was the people that stopped him from going into the temple, the Jewish people that stopped him from, I shouldn't say going into the temple, from looting the temple. And they're the ones that beat him, and we know the rest of that story.
I'm agreeing with everything you just said about that, but Alexander the Great himself was said by the Greeks to have gone into the temple itself.
Was he?
Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't kill him.
So,
But he didn't try to stop the religion of the Jews. He left all of that alone. He was just literally looking around on his way through town, is what it amounted to. But they said, the Greeks said, that he went into the building.
Well, I'm not talking about the building, I just know that when you talk about Aaron going into the most holy place, remember they had that bells on his thing, so to make sure that he's still alive, it was that much. But then again, that may have been when the cloud was settling.
It's over it.
God was there, so maybe that's the point, the cloud was settled over, and God was there, so.
but still, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, if the cloud wasn't there, if I was a Jewish person, I still wouldn't go in there. I mean, right. But
They didn't get dragged to Babylon because they were doing the right things.
correct. That's why they were in captivity this whole time.
Punishment. This is their punishment. They could have had it, and it would have had their power if they would have followed God's law.
Exactly.
So this is their punishment. This is how they do this. It's not punishment.
I mean, good point. And we're talking from roughly 605 to Antiochus was roughly 160. And there's still punishment after that. So we're talking 300-400 years that they're in punishment, just like Jason said here. So,
And he's right, if they were following God, the cloud may have been, but since they weren't God,
God wasn't there. I mean, it's an interesting question. Is that the reason why they weren't? Because the cloud wasn't there? Because God wasn't there? I don't know.
well, and as I was asking that question, I also was thinking about, they took the ark of the covenant. Did they worry about it being covered then? I know when the Jews
Yes.
brought it back, they had it covered on the ark, but did those people, did they worry about it being,
More than likely, no.
seen it?
Did- Yeah.
Leaders were coming and taking it. They don't know what the right way is and the wrong way is. But again, they usually lost the ark because
Doing something wrong.
so.
I mean, things that they held dear to themselves, when they did something wrong, they lost it all.
Well, when you see it in the movies, when they look at the ark, they
Oh. Well, movies are true, right? Just like the internet. So, I mean, there's many things we can speculate on this, but I think Jason brought up a good point. You know, the cloud wasn't there, the people were sinning. God's not with them. He's not with them. Because if he was, they wouldn't be in the situation that they're in because they put themselves there.
Well, and I would assume that God being present would be what made the most holy place the most holy place, and to keep acting from it.
It's just a place. It's so. Yes, Bill. When the tent. When the physical temple was built? I don't know. I didn't study on that.
Yeah, I've been working on that same thing while you guys are talking. I don't think there's anything about the cloud ever being over the temple.
Over the temple?
It was over the tabernacle. And it was over the tabernacle, not all the time, but they were getting ready to move, or God was present, saying something, and talking to Moses, things like that. But somebody find it if you can find it, but I don't think it was over the temple.
I mean, it's good for that we're thinking that way, But it shows that, you know, we're looking at the history, okay, it was over the tabernacle. Was it or was it not over the temple? Well, I'm sure somebody will find that out for next week, and we can talk about that for a little bit. But good points by everybody here. And I think the biggest point is God wasn't with them. And that's the biggest point that the Jews are having here, is that God wasn't with them because of their sins, because of their disobedience. God's not with them, so they're not getting all these other things. I don't want to call them privileges, but all these other things that when God was there to protect them, they're no longer having these things because he's not there. They're not blessed. That's the right word. They're not blessed. So, I mean, it's interesting to look at it that way and go down a couple of these rabbit holes, you know, about the tabernacle and temple. How come these other folks didn't die? So, different conversation, different class. Anything else? I mean, great conversation here. And when that happens, I always lose my spot.
38 or
39. But I lost my spot in verse 39. We're at the spot where it's talking about the king will give great honor to those who acknowledge him. And the king is still talking about Antiochus. And that he'll give honor to those who acknowledge him and he would appoint, meaning that he will cause them to rule over many. Antiochus actually sold the priesthood to the highest bidder. That's the type of guy he was. And earlier on we talked about Onias was the high priest, talking back when Tom brought up about the temple and the guy going in. Onias the third was the high priest back at that time, and he was rightfully the high priest. He was a religious man who opposed the Hellenization of the Jews, so he was truly a high priest. He wasn't one just inserted in. And he was the first one that was booted out by Antiochus IV, and he bribed Jason to become the high priest at that point. And then at that point, Antiochus wasn't happy with Jason, so he gave more money to another guy, Melanius, and for him to be the high priest. And Melanius had Onias III put to death. So that's how corrupt Antiochus was. So the Jewish religion, we're going to get rid of your high priest. We're going to pay this next guy to become, who is not a religious leader, who is not a true high priest. I'm not happy with him. I'm going to pay the next guy. Oh, the next guy not happy with your true high priest. He's dead now because he killed him. That's what it's referring to as about he will give great honor to those that acknowledge him, and he will cause them to rule over many. Those that followed what he did and did what he asked were rewarded. All you had to be was a yes man for Antiochus, and you could move up and rank and do different things. And that's what Jason was. It didn't work out well for him. Melanius, eventually it didn't work out well for him. But these guys were paid off to do certain things because they were, yes, Antiochus, I'll do exactly what you say. Whether it's to save their own skin or move up, get money, don't know. I couldn't find anything on that. But that's what, the end of verse 39 talk about. These people were getting paid to do certain things because they were just doing what Antiochus said. They were his yes men. And at the end of it, he says it caused them to rule over many. He promised riches to these people. He gave them power for anybody that followed his policies and that enforced them. And Antiochus would even give out land. He would parcel out land as a reward for people. So if you did follow his policies, did certain things, here's a chunk of land for you. You now own this. This is you. So not only would he give them money and various things, he would also give them land and whatnot to reward them for being his yes man, for doing what he asks and doing what he says. And that's the type of person Antiochus was. He didn't have true faithful people behind him, as we're seeing here, because as he went on through his kingship, people were starting to realize some of this. And the revolt that was happening from the Jewish people was becoming more and more powerful. And so Antiochus is now paying people to do his things, to do his bidding, to oversee various things, to keep Jewish people out from being the high priest. And that's what's referring here at the end of verse 39 of what Antiochus was doing. I think it's pretty arrogant for somebody to put somebody in a power position like a high priest, to pay somebody else to take that position, which is supposed to be a religious and respected position, and he's paying people to do that. So not only is he that type of person, but the person that takes that money to do that role says a lot about them as well, that they're a non-trustworthy, a scrupulous type of person that would do something like that. And that just shows some of the people that were surrounding Antiochus in his kingdom. Any questions? We're at the home stretch. We got the last 6 verses of chapter 11. Verses 40 through 45. At the end of time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with the chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the foremost the sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. When Daniel heard this, I bet he really focused on the end of verse 45 there. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. I mean, I can only imagine when it's coming to an end. It's coming to fruition. This punishment, this torment, this horrific things to the Jewish people is going to end, and the guy that's doing this, he's going to come to an end too. But we got several verses to get through before we get to what's going to happen to Antiochus at that point. Going back up to verse 40, I don't want this battle here referring to at the end of the time the king of the south will collide with him and the king of the north. I don't want this to sound like it's the final battle. It's all come to fruition between Antiochus, the king of the north going against the Egypt and the king of the south. I don't want you to think this is the final big last battle that was discussed in verses 21 through 30. It's not. I think it's a general summary of what the angels has been talking to Daniel about, painting this whole picture through chapter 10 and 11 here. Everything has come to fruition here. This is the culmination of what I've just told you, Daniel. That's what I think this is referring to. Not just a final battle, but everything I've been talking about. This is it. This is the end of it. Everything we talked about, Daniel, it's now going to be over. It's going to end. And, excuse me. And it talks about at the end of time, as in verse 27 early on, the end is still to come at the appointed time. And this is in reference to the end of the Jewish suffering and the suffering from their previous sins, as was brought up by Jason and Bill, that the Jewish people are in this predicament because of their sins, because of their disobedience to God. That's why they're in this predicament. That's why they're suffering. That is what's going on here with the Jewish people. And verses 40 through 45 saying, this is going to an end. This is basically the last things that the angel is telling Daniel in chapter 11 of what's going to be happening to Antiochus and the things that are happening to the Jewish people. A little bit of history of what we talked about here. We talked about the chariots and the horsemen and the many ships, about the battles of the king of the north and king of the south. I believe that's referring back to one of the previous battles over in Alexandria in Egypt when Antiochus was eventually forced to go back to retreat because of the Roman ambassador says, you got your choice, leave or you're going to be fighting the Roman army, and he drew the circle around them. You got that much time to think. Once you step out, it's over. This is referring back to that time period. And that is what I believe, talking about the horsemen and the countries and the ship. Like I said, it's not a final battle. It's just a summary of everything that was brought up previously. And we know those battles happened, and we talked about that earlier, of what Antiochus did, how he turned tail and ran, and when he ran back through, to get home, what he has to go through? He's got to go through Jerusalem. He's got to go through Palestine to get back home. And he's leaving Egypt, and he's going back home. As referred to in verse 40, and we talked about when we get in verse 41, he will enter the beautiful land. As he's going home, he's entering the beautiful land being what? Palestine. So that's how he was getting home, and it refers to that He has this large army, and he's going to overflow them. As he's doing his battle, his soldiers are marching through. His ships are coming through all these different ports. You got these large armies coming through, so you're overflowing these cities with all this military. He's doing his looting. He's doing a little battle with these people, but there's so many people. That is referring to as the overflowing. But he's passing through. He's not stopping through these cities to do battle. He was going through to fight Egypt. When that didn't work, he was coming back through with these large armies, thousands of military going through these cities, but he's just passing through, except for the stop that he made in Jerusalem that was referred to earlier on in chapter 11. Talks about he's going to enter the beautiful land, which he did, and as he's doing this, like I said, for the most part he didn't battle, but he did fight some to get what he want. He would fight some nations that are through there. He's going back to Syria, and a lot of times it was so he could collect funds to what? Remember, he lost that one battle and he had to pay tribute, so he's still collecting money to pay off the Romans for 12 years. He's still got that tax bill on his head that he has to pay. So a lot of times when he's going back from point A to point B after battle, he's looting these other nations to collect funds to finish paying off his 12-year tax bill to the Roman army. Verse 41 goes on, as he's doing these things, many countries will fall, meaning Antiochus is conquering many of these nations, but of these will be rescued out of his hand. So there's certain countries that are not going to fall unto Antiochus' power. And it talks about Edom, Moab, and foremost the sons of Ammon. These were not taken captive. These were not brought under Antiochus' power. They were surrounding nations in that area, so it was very easy for them to be under attack, but they weren't affected by any attack that may have happened to them. They were not brought under Antiochus' power. They were not brought under his control. These cities were protected and safe. Why God chose these cities, I don't know. Couldn't find out. Couldn't find out, meaning I didn't find any commentaries that could tell me. But these three specifics were protected for whatever reason from Antiochus and his terror as he's coming on through. Any questions? We get your question yet?
You answered one of them already, yeah.
Okay. We're going to stop at verse 41. We'll pick up 42 next week. And we'll definitely wrap up the chapter next week and get partway into chapter 12. I highly recommend reading chapter 12. 12 was awful hard for me. You could really go off one way with it or off another or off a third way. So please read chapter 12 so I can answer any questions you may have. Thank you.